This is Hannibal from the Hannibal TV on YouTube. And today I have a returning guest who's a podcaster himself. He's also a wrestling author. He was associate producer to the movie The Wrestler with Mickey Rourke, and he's a commentator on the wrestling industry as well. None other than Evan Ginzburg. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm good and great to be back on and good to see you again.
Good to see you too. Where exactly are you based in the New York area? Are you right in the city area?
I am in Forest Hills, Queens, and a hop, skip, and a jump into Manhattan. And I grew up on WWWF, going to MSG and Nassau Coliseum, Westchester County Center, Sunnyside Garden back in the day when it was cheap and pretty much weekly and a different world back then. Yeah.
Yeah, you've been posting a lot lately, and I agree with this about, I mean, as much as people seem, for whatever reason, I don't know if they still do because it's been kind of flat lately, but they love Triple H running things. But it's far more expensive to go to wrestling now than it ever was under Vince McMahon. And there's also far less events. It seems like they've turned a blind eye to house shows that we all remember from our childhood as being a chance to interact more with the wrestlers. And now I guess they don't make enough money, or for I assume they don't make enough money, or because wouldn't they keep them if they were making enough?
Well, the problem is arenas like Madison Square Garden, to rent the garden is about $500,000. So you had better draw and you would, the ticket prices obviously go up as well. So it's not the same business that I grew up on. When I was a kid, it was a blue collar, totally mock audience. And, you know, we, we cringed when the faces got kicked and punched, and we rejoiced when the heels lost. And when the tickets went from $3 to $6 to $4 to $7, they actually announced it at the Garden, and the audience let out an audible moan because they were blue collar people. And my dad was a New York City taxi driver. And, this is going back 50 years. My first card was June 24th, 1974. Nikolai Volkov and Fred Blassie against Bruno and Strongbow, Chief J. Strongbow, and the Valiants against Ho and Gurria. And how surreal my life is. I later became good friends with Nikolai Volkov and Jimmy and Johnny Valiant. So the irony of it all, I was a kid and they were 10 feet tall to me, and they were superheroes and supervillains out of, Marvel Comics. And the first night when I walked into the Garden on June 24th, 74, my first thought, I couldn't make this up. I go, wow, it's in color, because we had a black and white TV back then. I was like Dorothy landing in Oz. It was like this new world, and I've loved it ever since, with reservations, of course.
Do you think that's going to hurt them in the long run? Because, for instance, like when I was a kid, I had to pay for my ticket because my parents weren't necessarily wrestling fans, and I was definitely from the lower middle class. So does this kind of like eliminate the loyalty of kids like me that would have gone by paying their own ticket?
Oh,
And
absolutely. I'm hearing from more and more of my followers on my social media. People are saying, I have to look my kid in the eye, or kids, and say we can't afford to go to WWE anymore. The last show at Madison Square Garden was $66 to over $1,000 for ringside, over $1,000. So just do the math. If you're a mom and dad and two kids, even at $66 plus transportation and parking and food and gimmicks, you're looking at a $500 night, and the average person cannot afford this. And more people are just saying, I can't do it anymore. And I hate to say no to my kids. So what's going to happen is they'll discover the indies or be forced to, search them out and have a better experience and an inexpensive experience. The kids will sit, right on top of the action. They'll meet the wrestlers. They'll get autographs. They'll take pictures. It's a whole different experience than a corporate WWE where, you have to pay $8,500 for the honor of meeting Triple H and Lex Luger at WrestleMania, or $6,500 to zip beer with Hulk Hogan, or $600 to meet the Usos all at WrestleMania, $600 to get some autographs. This is going to price out an awful lot of people. The tickets at WrestleMania are $300 to $10,000. I mean, do the math. And that's before, hotels and air and everything else, because people fly in from everywhere. So some people just, it's beyond them, and you're going to lose that passion. Like, for example, I was a huge Knicks fan in the 70s and 80s. I was there for the championship Knicks when I was a kid. And now that a playoff ticket in the nosebleeds are $300, I don't have the same passion or interest that I used to. I'll watch it on TV if they're in the playoffs or whatnot. But yeah, you're going to eliminate a certain chunk of your audience, and others are just going to say, I don't want to feel like a money mark and have my pocket picked. So have the money vacuumed out of my pocket. So even if they can afford it, to sit in the last row at WrestleMania for $300 is a little ridiculous. You're miles away watching it on a screen.
Yeah, and I've even heard when you talk about the cost of the autograph sessions that now it seems like, particularly in WWE, I haven't seen it as much with AEW wrestlers. Haven't actually really seen it at all, but they seem to make a big deal. Do not approach these guys in their normal life. If you see them at the airport, if you see them at a restaurant, do not approach them for an autograph. Only if it's at a WWE approved autograph session should you approach these people. And there's all kind of backlash with these guys that only really work once a week now. Do not approach them. They're going to snap at you. Whereas in the old days, when, as you said in your 350 days movie, 350 days a year, and I've heard Volkov tell the story, even the Iron Sheik would sometimes be late for airplanes because he would feel bad not giving autographs at airports and stuff. I'm not saying that there should be like some type of happy medium, but it seems like there's a more of a backlash than ever for people simply asking for an autograph.
Well, let me discuss that as a former 1980s avid autograph collector, also in the 70s. I would stand outside Madison Square Garden, and for the most part, Bruno Sammartino, superstar Billy Graham, even the heels, Lou Albano and the Grand Wizard, and all these guys would sign for the most part. And ironically, the only guys who wouldn't sign for us kids were Dusty Rhodes and Andre the Giant. They wouldn't even so much as look at us, and they were beloved. So you were pretty smartened up at an early age. The heels sometimes were super nice. George Steele would stop and sign for us and talk normal, and his shtick on TV was he couldn't speak. So, as kids, they kind of exposed the business for us. The nice guys weren't always nice, and the heels generally were nice, and it was interesting. So I'll take this a further step. Back in the 80s, I used to collect autographs avidly, and guys like Muhammad Ali would sign everything in front of you, the most famous man in the world, and smiling and happy to do it. And to spin it that you're somehow a stalker or a villain to approach a wrestler outside of an arena after spending a small fortune to see them and ask for an autograph, I think it's ridiculous. They have no problem charging you 3 figures for an autograph or 4 figures for an autograph. So, Hulk Hogan signing autographs for $425 a pop in his store. Undertaker recently did a show where there was a toast. You got a toast with the Undertaker. $2,873 for a toast with this guy, and he's on the fans' good list. To me, that's a greedy millionaire. Basically exploiting the fans. I don't get it, but so the other side is, yeah, don't stalk them at airports. 4 a.m. Don't stalk them at hotels. Don't go to their house and harass them. Yeah, I mean that's the other side of it. There's guys who are out of their minds, or they're doing it as a business. But if you're a fan and you politely walk up to a wrestler, outside an arena or wherever the case may be, I'm a big fan. Can I please have your autograph? I don't see you being a bad guy, no matter how much a ruthless billion-dollar corporation like WWE spins it. They want to sell you those autographs. That's why they don't want you to approach the talent. Come on.
Exactly. And speaking of some of the guys that are perceived as good that won't sign, I remember the Rock didn't sign for us once after a show in Hull, Quebec, where they had to kind of walk through the fans to get to their car. Then he walked to the car after telling us to F off. And the Sultan was driving the car, Rikishi, and he rolled down the window while the Rock sat in the back. And I remember he put his hand over his face like this so no one could take pictures. And the Sultan sat there and signed every single person's autograph. So it's interesting to see in real life. The Rock may have changed. This was like back in '97 or '98, but it's interesting to see who the real ones are that will actually
Yeah,
be nice.
I would say the majority, good people and love the fans, but I think they're getting pressure from the promotion itself. Don't give them away. We can make money from this, and I think it's a shame. It's a shame to have to spend hundreds of dollars to get an autograph and meet somebody for 30 seconds or a minute or whatever. It's greedy. That's it in a nutshell. I don't need to do 1,000 words on it. It's greedy.
Yeah, it makes me wonder how much of a percentage Steve Austin gets, for instance, for his upcoming WrestleMania autograph session, if it's a 50-50 split with WWE.
That I don't know. Nicole Bass told me, and she was a dear friend. She said to me when she did appearances, she didn't get a penny. So I don't know. I don't know. That's a long time ago.
Yeah, I do know, like back in the '90s, there wasn't a lot that actually liked doing appearances for that reason. It was just kind of considered part of the job. But definitely the pay seems to be different now overall. So who knows?
And why should millionaire wrestlers sell their autographs for hundreds, if not thousands of dollars? It's exploitative. They don't need it, or give some of that to a legend or pioneer in need instead of them having to do a GoFundMe for burial or hospital expenses or to save their homes. Give something back. You see the same guys always giving back. Chris Jericho, Mick Foley. These guys have a heart. A lot of the others are taking with both hands. Give something back. You're in a different situation today.
Yeah, and I don't even know if that is it might even be tax deductible for some of these guys, depending how they pay. So, really, more should do it. I've seen Tony Khan do it a few times too, but Billy Graham, for instance, his life, and I know this from talking to his wife and stuff. He literally died because he ran out of money to get the best medical treatment. So it's kind of sad in a way that as big of an icon as he is, they didn't do more to keep him alive towards the end. I know he wasn't always the nicest, but he also had a GoFundMe for his funeral at the end of
Well, I've worked with Billy Graham and dealt with him, and he was one of my childhood heroes. And let me say this: without Billy Graham, there's no Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan basically borrowed. I'm using the word politely. Borrowed Billy Graham's shtick. And Jesse Ventura, who was a big part of the expansion in the 80s, he borrowed, obviously, Billy Graham's shtick and many, many others. And there should be a fund to take care of these guys. Triple H at the press scrums always does the spiel. Another record-breaking gate. You should be ashamed of yourself that a guy like Billy Graham, needs a GoFundMe at the end. Butch needed a GoFundMe at the end. Virgil needed a GoFundMe at the end. So many of these guys, and yeah, the fans saved Kamala and Paul Orndorff's houses. And let me just say this, because you're the right forum to say it, because your audience is smarter than the average like clickbait, guy. You have these guys always saying online, and it's absolutely not true, they all pissed away, fortunes on wine, women, and song. They all pissed away fortunes on wine, women, and song. Absolutely not true. Prior to the Hulkamania rock and wrestling era, a lot of the biggest stars in the world never broke 100 grand. Never broke 100 grand. These guys are my friends. They told me the numbers. Johnny Valiant, the Valiant Brothers, #1 tag team in the world. Johnny said to me, I never made 100 grand in wrestling. So how did you piss away fortunes? You're on the road 300 plus days a year. You're supporting a family back home. Okay. You got hotels, 3 meals a day, gas, insurance, taxes, cleaning, all the expenses of 2 families. You're on the road and you're supporting your family back wherever they are. Johnny's was in Pittsburgh. So I could go on and on with this, but these guys worked. When we did 350 days, where'd the title come from? The NWA champs literally worked 350 days a year. They were never home. And Bret Hart said to us, he worked 330 days as champ. And Greg Valentine, who was always like the #1 challenger, the Intercontinental champ, he worked 320 days a year. So this is not exaggerated numbers. If you're working over 300 days a year for many, many, many years, where's the pension? Where's the 401k? Where's the health benefits? This independent contractor thing is just to benefit the promoters. It's not benefiting these guys. I mean, when all is said and done, they're going to do what the promotion tells them to do. And so for the fans who are, 500 wrestling books in and obsessively talk about this on clickbait wrestling pages, they don't get it. They don't get it. These guys have told me how little they made on merchandise, a lot of them, and etc. so on. And yeah, in the mid 80s, they made more money, but do the math. Yeah, do the math. So let's say a top star in the mid 80s was making 400 grand a year. That's a lot of money to the average person. But if you're working 300 plus days a year, average it out. That's only a little over $1,000 an appearance. The headline arenas, I can assure you that Mick Jagger or Elton John or James Brown or whoever was headlining those same arenas weren't working for $1,000 or 2,000 or even 5,000. They were never paid what they should have been paid back in the day. Today, it's better. Yeah, the top stars today are making good money. It's a different scenario. But the old school guys, the legends and pioneers, it's disgraceful that WWE, $1 billion corporation, doesn't have a fund to somehow help them at the end. Come on.
Yeah. And they do offer rehab to people for free that use it. But there's some wrestlers, like, as much as people like to think Billy did a lot of drugs versus Billy Graham, he was never a drinker. At various points, he had pain pill stuff, but it was never like crazy in the last 30 or so years of his life. They should have, like, because he wasn't getting rehab, maybe given more towards his medical, since they didn't have to pay for his rehab. But maybe there's some sort of special tax write-off they get for the rehab people. Who knows?
All I could say is they're making crazy money. if you set aside 1% of your massive profits, half of 1% of your massive profits to some kind of fund for these guys, it would be a blessing. It would be the right thing to do. And you know, to see a Billy Graham, die the way he did, go out the way he did, there wouldn't be a WWE if there wasn't a Billy Graham. Because, like I said before, Hulk Hogan was basically Billy Graham. You could spin it any way you want, but he was doing Billy Graham.
How was Billy Jack Haynes back in the day when you would ask for his autograph at wrestling events?
I don't remember. I asked him one time, and he signed, and it was nice, and it was just a brief, thank you, nice to meet you, boom. So it was really hard to make any kind of character judgment, but he was gracious and kind enough to do it. Most of them did, even the heels. The majority did. I could, like I said, Dusty and Andre wouldn't. I remember Tiger Chung Lee wouldn't. I guess he was in heel mode, trying not to expose the business back then. But the vast amount of guys with John Cena once said no, and Kurt Angle was super nice and said yes. So it depends. It depends on the guy. It depends on the day.
Yeah, I've heard that about Kurt Angle. Someone asking if you ever met Lou Thez or saw him wrestle. Any memories?
Yes. Lou Thez was super gracious to the fans, and I was at the Meadowlands for that Legends Battle Royale, and it was a thrill for me because a lot of these guys I had never seen live. This was, I believe, 1987 at the Meadowlands, and sadly, it didn't draw because that era fans didn't care that Lou Thez was there. So the last two guys in the ring were Lou Thez and Pat O'Connor going hold for hold. You can watch it on YouTube, but I was just marking out because Edouard Carpentier was in there, and the Crusher, and a lot of these guys I had never seen before live because some were even before my time. I started going in '74. And it was a thrill to see some of them. And Lanny was a dear friend, Lanny Poffo. He always told me that Randy was very bitter that they wouldn't allow Angelo Poffo in the Battle Royale for whatever reason. I don't know the backstage politics, but Randy really took it as a slight because his dad was a headliner back in the day, Angelo. And, for whatever reason, WWF would not put him in that Battle Royale. And Randy always had a grudge over it.
Yeah, I remember. I think Lanny told me that same story. So that was 1987.
Around then, yeah, give or take a year.
So that was the main event at the Meadowlands.
They had a battle royale with the younger guys, and they had a battle royale with the old timers. So they had two battle royales that night. And I vaguely remember Randy Savage wrestling Harley Race. But Race had lost a step or two by that point, and but that was the attraction for me, the old timers battle royale. That's why I was there.
Well, speaking of Harley, someone's asking if you had much interaction with Harley over the years.
I saw him at many conventions, always gracious and friendly. I asked him for an autograph, and I was terribly disappointed when he signed it The King. He didn't sign Harley Race. He was in character. He signed The King. But I wasn't going to look a gift horse in the mouth. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Now you have a book out, Wrestling Rings, Blackboards, and Movie Sets. We see Nicole Bass on there, Lanny Poffo. Who are some of these people out here? Because some of these I don't recognize.
Okay, I'll go from Lanny as the genius. That's Nikolai next to him. That's Killer Kowalski. That's Nicole Bass. And this is not just wrestling. These are 100+ stories on my life. That's John Lennon. And I tell this story in the book. I'm at Madison Square Garden, and it's December 8, 1980. Bruno's wrestling Sergeant Slaughter. It's a rare night that Backlund's in Japan and not on the show. Great match, great card. Everybody walks out happy. And the second I get out of Madison Square Garden, it's around 11 p.m. at night. I'm just walking towards the train, and I feel a weird buzz in the air. There's a weird vibe, a bad vibe. I walk up to an absolute stranger. Guy was dressed well. He looked like a Wall Street boy or a lawyer or whatnot. I walk up to a stranger. I go, "What happened?" Because obviously something happened. And he said, "John Lennon was just shot." We didn't know he was dead yet. John Lennon, there was no internet. There were no cell phones. This is 1980. So I get home. We turn on the TV, and John Lennon's dead. Killed in New York. The Garden, for those who don't know, is on 34th Street. Lennon was killed on 72nd Street in Manhattan. So it wasn't that far away either, logistically. And my first reaction was, I'm so ashamed it happened in New York, because John Lennon always had that iconic New York T-shirt, and we were very ashamed that it happened. And and also on the cover, those porn stars, Desiree Cousteau and Seika. Seika became a good personal friend of mine.
Is that the top left, and then underneath Nicholas?
The brunette is Desiree Cousteau. I tell a story about meeting her, and there's a story. And Seika is the blonde. So I'm working a convention as an agent with Johnny Valiant. So suddenly this statuesque, beautiful blonde sits near us, and I'm like, I know her from somewhere. Where do I know her from? And I go, wow, that's Seika, the porn queen. That's Seika, And we're sitting there for 3 days at the Chiller Convention in New Jersey. 3 days. So we're just talking in between, them signing autographs and taking pictures. We're just talking, and we hit it off, and we just became close friends. I mean, she's married and monogamous. We were always just friends. And so I'm at a party for Lou Albano's birthday party, and I uttered the words I never expected to say in my life. I said, "Seika, this is my mom. Mom Seika." I'm introducing my mother to the platinum princess of porn, And there's crazy stories in this book. In the middle, that's the Valiant brothers, who both became dear friends. Jimmy Valiant, I tell a story about visiting his wrestling camp in Shoresville, Virginia, and it's on a mountain. And all you could see, it's like The Sound of Music. All you could see are mountains. And and the story is Jimmy Valiant in Shangri-La. He's like the guru at the top of the mountain, and the kids come to learn from him, to become wrestlers and learn about the pitfalls of the business, the good, the bad, and ugly of it. And Johnny, I became his shoot manager. I booked his one-man comedy show, and I booked him into wrestling appearances and autograph signings, private parties, etc., so on. And next to him is Richard Pryor. I tell a story in the book. Oh, thank you, Mike. What a unique cast of characters. Oh, yeah. So Richard Pryor, I tell the story. He already was ill when he did his last appearance in New York, and it was at a little venue called the Westbury Music Fair. And this was in the 90s, and he was struggling to get to the stage, struggling. And he had giant cue cards in front of him, giant cue cards. And he had to sit through the 45-minute set. Years earlier, he would do hour 45, 2-hour, unbelievable live comedy shows. And now he was withering away. He was dying. So the punchline to that story, the set was very disappointing. But in spite of it, every single person in the audience rose, gave him a standing ovation, not for the show, out of respect for who he was, what he had done, his body of work. And as he walked back to to the dressing room, struggled back to the dressing room, hard for him to walk. We patted him on the back, on the shoulder. It was like touching like this sacred figure, because anybody that knows stand-up, he was the god of stand-up. He was the number one guy ever. Next to Richard Pryor is Bruno Sammartino, who was a childhood hero. And below that is, I tell the story of making The Wrestler. I tell multiple, I was associate producer. So that's me with Mickey Rourke. And next to me is Nicolas Cage. So I'll tell a funny story. So when we're making The Wrestler, we tried to get an $18 million budget, which sounds like a lot of money to the average person, but that's just an indie film. It's not a huge budget. And on Mickey's name, his star had waned. He wasn't the star that he had been. And we couldn't get the money. We only got $6 million. So that's like the food budget on the Avengers today. It's nothing. So Aronofsky was considering Nicolas Cage, and he had me meet him one day. Where, pray tell? In the garage at the Hammerstein Ballroom at a Ring of Honor show. So this is 2007 or so, and it was my job. And Nicolas Cage at the time was a huge box office star, huge at that time. You're going back almost 20 years. And I had to meet him and get him backstage quickly before the paparazzi, caught on. And I meet him, and for like 30 seconds, I'm like marking out. The guy's like a big movie star. And then I notice, I go, he's just wearing a pair of jeans like anybody else. He's just wearing a regular pair of shoes like anybody else. And he's just another guy. It's like, sometimes somebody's such a big star, you have this reaction. And he was so warm and gracious and friendly. And the funniest thing that night, we're watching the Ring of Honor card, and Ring of Honor circa 2007 was great. Nigel McGuinness, Bryan Danielson, all these guys, Kevin Steen, all the guys that would end up huge stars in WWE, Tyler Black, these guys. So I'm sitting there with Nicolas Cage, and all of a sudden he goes to me, Evan, is this real, like UFC? So I almost didn't want to like disillusion him. I said, no, Nick, it's worked. It's hard hitting, but it's worked. It's a wrestling match. He didn't even know what he was watching. So subsequently, I'm sitting in Aronofsky's office. He has a studio in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and Aronofsky says to me, Evan, Nick is a great guy, but Mickey's the right guy for the part. Mickey looks the part. And related to that, I had brought Lanny Poffo in for a reading, and Aronofsky says to me, Evan, I like this guy. He's got charisma. I like him, but he looks too healthy for this movie. He looks too healthy. And at the time, Nicolas Cage, he was in his 40s and he was fit. He was lean. He was in shape. So, Nicolas Cage was not the right guy, as great an actor as he was. And Aronofsky went with his heart, and he was right, because that performance is heart-wrenching. Hey, Alex Rodriguez from the Yankees just said hi. Yeah.
How do you fit? What part was Lanny reading for?
Just in general, I did a half dozen casting calls, and I brought a ton of guys in. I brought in Romeo Roselli, Ron Killings, Necro Butcher. I'll tell you a funny Necro Butcher story. So the first time him and Aronofsky are scheduled to meet, Necro Butcher's like 2 hours late. 2 hours late. And Aronofsky's getting a little antsy because it's been a long day and it's the end of the day and the guy's just not there and we can't reach him. So I dig up some contact information I had on him because I had set up the casting calls. So I dialed one of the numbers I had. Who answers the phone? Necro Butcher's mom, his mom. Okay. So now Necro Butcher's mom is worried about her boy Dylan, because Dylan, we can't find Dylan. We don't know where Dylan is. You know? So now throughout the day, while we're waiting even longer for Necro Butcher, his mom keeps calling, worried about him. You know, this is the guy that would mutilate himself in hardcore matches. So finally, Aronofsky goes, Evan, I'm really sorry. I'm exhausted. I got to go. So Aronofsky heads out. So, of course, 5 minutes later, Necro Butcher shows up. He goes, I'm sorry, guys. My cell phone died. So now I'm frantically calling Aronofsky. Darren, he's here. He's here. So Darren graciously comes back to the office. They hit it off. And the rest is history. And Necro Butcher was great in that. He was great.
I know he had some cancer battles that I believe he's overcome now for Necro Butcher. Do you think any of that had to do with all of his light tube matches? Because we hear that one of the dangers people don't talk about is the stuff on the inside of those light tubes
Uh,
is a carcinogen.
I have no medical background, but I heard the same thing you did about, light tubes having carcinogens and not being healthy. And, light tubes are really for light, not for breathing that stuff in. So I don't know, cancer, you have people that are utterly health conscious and they don't smoke and they get lung cancer. So there's various factors, and it could be genetic, it could be stress, it could be lack of sleep. There's so many factors. It's hard to say his hardcore wrestling caused it, but it's a theory, and it could very well be true or part of it. I honestly don't know. I'm not a medical guy.
Yeah, you never know who's going to live and who isn't. It's like the Lanny thing, who constantly would say, "I'm going to live to be 100 or die trying," was his saying. And then you have guys like Abdullah the Butcher, who never takes care of himself, is at 84 now.
Well,
So
I knew Lanny very well. Lanny would sleep on my couch, and Lanny ate healthy. And he used to say, I don't put anything bad into my body. I don't put anything bad into my head. I don't think negative thoughts. I have no bitterness towards people. And
well, that is not true, but yeah,
well, he said it.
yeah.
Yeah, I know.
He
Guys that
was bitter against WWE for a long time, but that changed at the end.
Yeah, he said, I have no heat with Vince McMahon. He, gave me the genius role, and I main evented, and I was on Saturday Night Main Event. I beat Hogan in front of millions of people. I made good money that run. I saved my money. But let me say this about Lanny, because I knew him well. He said to me, Evan, I'm leading, the good life, retired in Ecuador. He had bought a co-op in Ecuador. He said, I'm up to 282 pounds. That's a lot of weight to carry, on somebody's heart. And we also forget that back in the 70s, these guys wrestled in smoke-filled arenas and breathed that in. And Nikolai was very health conscious. He didn't live to a ripe old age either. And then the wear and tear on your body, being in a different time zone multiple times a week, on and off planes, it's just not a lifestyle conducive to longevity. And I was shocked when Nikolai died. I was shocked when Lanny died, and they were dear friends, and I have pieces on them in the book. And Nikolai, I would room with on the road. Mike says, good man. Absolutely. Mike, when Nikolai died, Bret Hart publicly said Nikolai Volkov was the nicest wrestler I ever met. That was a public statement from Bret Hart, who met everybody. His family was in the business. So, the point being, you could take care of yourself, but the damage, even Nikolai at one point when he was wrestling Bruno at the Garden in the 70s, this guy was carrying 340 pounds. This isn't healthy on the heart. There's a lot of factors. And if somebody had asked me years ago, and I was on the road with these guys as an agent, if somebody asked me years ago, would you bet me $10,000 on who would live longer, Nikolai or the Iron Sheik, I would have thrown down 10 grand on Nikolai, and I would have lost. So you never know with these things. And It's a shame to lose, dear friends and guys who entertain literally millions of people, millions of people.
Did Lanny ever tell you what was the reason behind Ecuador? Because I never got the chance to ask, and I always found that interesting. What exactly did he choose Ecuador
He
for?
got a beautiful co-op or condo on the beach for, next to nothing, something like 110, 120 grand. I forget exactly, a nice lifestyle, a lot of expatriates, a lot of Americans living there. He just says it's a great and ironically healthy place, to live out the rest of your life. And he said, and it's a short hop, skip, and a jump to Florida and the States if I want to do occasional appearances. And Lanny had actually asked me the weekend he died to get him some bookings. And I said, sure. And then he called me back and said, Evan, I'm kind of tired. I don't want to run myself ragged. Forget the bookings. And thank God that played out like that, because whenever I booked him, he stayed by me and slept on my couch, and my wife cooked for him. We would have found him dead on the couch, and I would have been traumatized for life. So some things, ironically, work out, because that would not have been good for me. Having a dear friend dead on your couch, boy. Yeah.
How's the state of independence in New York right now? Because I've noticed overall, it seems like now that there's two companies that pay a lot, and a lot of them just holding on to talent and not using them, that they want to charge independent promoters more these days overall to use top talent. And it seems like, I know you're in a big market, but it seems like the independent scene isn't as hot in the last few years since AEW has been around.
AEW does well in New York. I was at their World's End pay-per-view, and it was packed, and the tickets were not cheap. We were in $100 seats, and they went as much as $600. So, AEW does well. I wouldn't qualify them as an indie, but the small mom and pop indies that have been around a long time, that have a following, that have a built-in audience, a loyal audience. Like we have a New York Wrestling Connection, NYWC, and they pack the place, and it's 25 to 40 a ticket. And, I think the indies are doing well, and partly, again, because a lot of people just can't afford WWE, and they want that wrestling fix, that experience. So, and of course, you have indies, where you have 36 people, and there's more wrestlers and vendors than fans in attendance. You have that too. I'll tell you a real horror story, man. I had Tommy Rich in town for a week or so. I booked him into a indie in New Jersey. He's sitting there, and Vince Steele, an indie wrestler, collapses in ring and dies in ring 20 feet from Tommy Rich, who I booked on the show. And Tommy said to me, he was nearly in tears. He said, I'm in wrestling 50 years. I've never experienced that. I've never seen a guy die in the ring. And so for people who do the it's all fake, dying in the ring isn't fake. There's risks, and guys have died. He happened to collapse. He was 450 pounds, this guy, but beloved, a beloved wrestler, and people were traumatized that were there. They were sobbing, and luckily I wasn't there. I booked Tommy in there. I went to visit Jimmy Valiant, who was in town doing another appearance. I hadn't seen him in years, and he's 82 going on 83, so you don't take that chance and go, oh, I'll see him next time. So I was happy to see Jimmy, and I love that guy. That guy's got more charisma than the entire Raw locker room. And but yeah, man, when you go to a wrestling show, I've done a little heel managing. I'm backstage. Guys are hurt. They're wailing in pain. You don't know from one second to the next what can go wrong. Greg Valentine had a crazy experience on an indie. He was walking up the ring steps, and the ring steps collapsed, and he got injured. His knee got all twisted up just walking into the ring before he actually got in the ring. So, there's real dangers in wrestling, any which way you look at it. And, it's a brutal business, and not all that many people walk away well from it. More so now than in the past. But if you took the payroll of this WrestleMania, these guys are making more money today than I would guesstimate 95% plus of any wrestler that ever stepped foot in the ring, and much, much bigger stars than them. So they're here at the right time. Today's stars, they're making good money.
Yeah, but I'm not sure from top to bottom of the card they're as big as stars as like in the '80s when more people seem to know every single person on the card.
Oh
And
yeah. The NXT guys aren't clocking crazy money. Yeah, it's yeah. I'm saying the big WWE stars and the big AEW stars are doing well, and the
yeah,
other guys, it's like a world apart. Oh, definitely, definitely.
I think the minimum pay now for WWE I heard is 350 for the main roster, so that's pretty good. 350,000 a year. And then I heard Dave Meltzer say like the average wrestler now wrestles 10 to 30 times a year in either AEW or WWE.
Well,
With
that's you know, there's good and bad to that too. I'm an AEW fan. I would like to see house shows. I would like to see them more often than the 2 or 3 pay-per-views they run in New York a year. Um, you know, I go back to the days when you could literally go to 4 or 5 WWF shows in a month and have a great time, and every show is different. And now what it's turned into, because of the expense, now it's some kid's birthday present, graduation present. Bill Pierce, great wrestler. Chris Michaels. It's a birthday present. It's a Christmas present. It's a once a year thing. It's a once a year, and you don't have that same connection that you used to have. WWF and then WWF would run once a month at Madison Square Garden, and sometimes as much as 14 times a year at Madison Square Garden. Now they come 4, 5, 6 times a year. It's a big difference, and it's it's hard to have that same connection. And it's more a big event. Get your money together. We'll save. We'll spend a small fortune, and Christmas present. They run December 26th at the Garden every year. It's a Christmas present for the kids. It's not a blue collar thing anymore.
and when you say 4 to 6 times a year, are you including like Long Island in that?
No, I'm saying the Garden will run between the house shows, Raw or SmackDown, 4, 5, 6 times a year. That's it. They're not there regularly anymore.
Whereas in the past, you're saying between New Jersey and New York, if you live in the New York City area.
The Garden alone
Yeah.
was one Monday every month, 12 times a year. And when they were really on fire, they would squeeze in 13 or 14 times a year. Like, for example, Backlund wrestled Pat Patterson 4 straight Garden cards, which was unprecedented. And Patterson and Backlund wrestled twice that July, the beginning of July and the end of July in 1979. So, wrestling 12, 13, 14 times a year is very different from wrestling 4, 5, 6 times a year, which is where they are at this point. And part of that is because of the ticket prices. People just can't afford it monthly.
Yeah, because even Toronto, they would go to once a month
Yeah.
at one point in the '80s, but now they came once a year the past couple of years to Toronto, and now I don't know if it's the exchange rate or what, but there's no future. I think AEW is going to do the Owen Hart Cup at Calgary probably, but their AEW hasn't been to Canada in over a year. and WWE. They did the Survivor Series and Elimination Chamber, but there's been nothing in between at all in Canada.
And with all the ridiculous politics today, you don't know how much issues there's going to be with visas and tariffs and taxes and all of this stuff. So, that could complicate things also, America and Canada. Now that we're mortal enemies, how absurd, how ridiculous.
The one thing that they're definitely dropping the ball on, and I don't know why, if it's just because they're politically correct or something, but if there was ever a time to reignite that feud in wrestling of the US versus Canada,
Yeah,
this is the time to do it because I've been in the US all winter. I love it here. I would rather be an American citizen, to be honest. But most Canadians hate the US, including my own family and most of my friends.
I have tons of friends in Canada. I mean, it's ridiculous. Politicians are the ones that cause stress between people. I say all the time, whether it's politics or religion, we're all people. You want a nice family, nice partner, wife, husband, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever the case may be. You want a good job, you want a decent place to live. People are people. The politicians pit people against each other. It's absurd. People in Canada want a good life. People in America want a good life. These are not your enemies. Come on.
Well, the exchange rate is like $1.44 these days, so it's pretty brutal for us. It's good for you guys if you want to cross the border and buy a bunch of stuff, though. But
It's funny when we would go down south in America, people would say to us, "Don't tell them y'all Yankees. Don't tell them y'all from New York." It's like we had heat in our own country. It's like they were still getting over the Civil War 150, 200 years later. Yeah.
so where you've been following this for many decades now, everyone's saying wrestling is in a quote unquote hot period right now. There is elements that show that, but overall, I mean, I think people on the streets, even though there are some big crowds and stuff, I don't feel people talking about wrestling as much like when I'm in the gym or like my regular non-fan friends. I could tell like last year's WrestleMania, people were coming up to me and talking about wrestling. This year, I don't see that happening at all. Like, do you see things still going well for a few more years? And if it drops, they're going to just inject more of the rock or whatever to give it a boost? Or do you think um, it's starting very slowly
Yeah, I
to go
think
down?
I think the decline is here already. This WrestleMania is not going to sell out. There's a ton of empty seats still. It's barely budged since they announced Jey Uso wrestling for the belt. He's not perceived as a main event guy. And in fact, he's not even going to be wrestling the main event guy. And it's ironic because that's his gimmick. Main event Jey Uso's not wrestling the main event for the title. So, yeah, look, again, I hate to belabor a point, but once you outprice a large portion of your fan base and they can only watch it on TV, on Peacock, whatever the case may be, you're not going to you're going to lose momentum. And it's wrestling has always been peaks and valleys, peaks and valleys. A lot of it is hype. Like they'll say Bruno sold out every time he was at Madison Square Garden. Absolutely not true. I was there for 10 years monthly, and he didn't sell out every show. And in fact, in the 60s, there was some pretty poor houses with Bruno headlining. But so wrestling is peaks and valleys. And of course, the Billy Graham, 10-month reign, he was on fire. He sold out the Garden every show except for his match with Peter Maivia. Every show he sold out.
But they would have called that a sellout today because now they say sellout for a setup, and that still had over 17,000. And
Oh, yeah.
now I've
Yeah.
heard them call like sometimes 12, 13,000 at the Garden to sell.
Well, the before the last TV taping, their last house show in December, they only drew 11,000. That would have been pitiful during the Billy Graham, 1970s Bruno, 1980s Backlund and Hogan eras. That would have been a pitiful crowd, 11,000. So yes, the signs are there that you can't keep charging obscene amount of money and expect, huge crowds and just charge more and more and more and bleed them for more and more and more. At some point, there's nothing left to give. The fans just don't have it. They can't financially do it. So I see eventually, and maybe soon, a decline, especially if WrestleMania is anticlimactic. Royal Rumble, they did a good job. I mean, turning Cena heel was pretty shocking and effective. But if WrestleMania is a disappointment, I think it's going to be like deflating a bag or whatnot, and to use the stereotype.
But Cena actually changed an Elimination Chamber because I didn't see Royal Rumble, but I heard a lot of people were disappointed that The Rock wasn't there, and they were expecting more from the Royal Rumble for the crowd that they had, but there wasn't as many surprises this year. But supposedly they knocked it out of the park with Elimination Chamber, other than the 4-match thing. You're in a stadium and you're only giving 4 matches.
Yeah. To me, Elimination Chamber is a pimple on the ass of NWA's War Games. I don't see it as that big a deal, but to me, it's a B pay-per-view. But there's like a religious fervor with some of the fans, but it's waning for WrestleMania, and that's their number one show. So I see the signs that the decline can very well be coming, and they're still making crazy money. They're taking with both hands, and nobody's going broke there. That I could tell you.
No, well, the Saudi Arabia money alone is what, 55 million a show. That's money they never had before, and all the streaming. But as far as like we see The Rock and this rapper at Elimination Chamber with John Cena, and since then there's been no mention of them, and it's just every week Cena standing there talking to Cody Rhodes with him. Like, if someone beat me up as bad as Cody was beat up, I wouldn't just stand there talking week after week.
Yeah,
I would attack.
And there's too much talk, and not everybody's a great talker. I mean, Jey Uso's not a great talker. That's part of his problem now. And put the guys. If you're going to do a 3-hour show with 45 minutes of wrestling, at bare minimum, put the guys on who could actually talk, like a Kevin Owens. To put on guys who aren't great talkers going endlessly in stilted, scripted, inane promos, it's that's not going to help them, because I'm hearing a lot more of that now. That people going, I don't want to watch a 3-hour wrestling show where there's hardly any wrestling. It's for the old school fans. It's still about wrestling.
Yeah, I tried to watch I did watch. Thank God I did it live with the Raw on Netflix, the very first one. There wasn't that much wrestling. There was a lot of time in between. There was a lot of advertising. To me, there wasn't enough action. So I don't know. That's just my taste in wrestling.
Well, I'll tell you the thing that rubbed me really the wrong way was Saturday night main events, where you have Jey Uso walking to the ring for 10 minutes, and then twice during his main event match with Gunther, you're cutting to long commercial breaks, which absolutely killed the match dead. Killed it. So WWE is plainly telling you the entrances, the theme music, the catchphrases, that's what's important. The wrestling isn't. And you should. I was in Korea. My wife's Korean, and I was watching wrestling on TV, various promotions, and they treat it like boxing, where the matches are not interrupted. You have a long set of commercials before the match and a long set of commercials after the match. Like in boxing, sometimes between rounds, you'll have a quickie 30-second commercial or whatnot. But they would never dream of cutting into a boxing match or a UFC match mid-match and interrupt it with a commercial. WWE destroyed Saturday night's main event twice. And this is also what people are saying to me. I don't want to invest an evening in a show that I'm frustrated by and not enjoying.
Yeah, and then there's the matter of the second world title. They already had Gunther lose clean to Cody Rhodes not too long ago. So why should anybody care about this secondary world title? It clearly is just secondary. It's more of at best an intercontinental title.
Yeah, and they're having them probably open WrestleMania as the opening match. And I'm old school. To me, that's not prestigious, being the opener. I understand it's a different mentality today. They want the fans hot, but that can backfire because when Drew McIntyre and CM Punk had their last match, that bloodbath, that stole the show, and it was the opening match. So everything afterwards paled in comparison. So the show felt flat. You know, I'm old school where the shows are supposed to build towards the main event, not peak and in the opening match, and you're sitting there 3 hours later, like numb, fighting to stay awake. It's that there's a lot of flaws to WWE's product and mentality. They're great at selling T-shirts.
Great salesman. We'll go for one last question from a fan here asking if you follow amateur wrestling, which is going through a resurgence right now in popularity.
I'm no expert, believe me, but I do recommend Ken Patera's book from WOHW Publishing. Kenny Casanova helped him with it. About 200 pages of that book is not on professional wrestling, which is one of the reasons the book is special. He's not doing 40 pages on some ridiculous WrestleMania angle. He talks a lot about amateur wrestling and reading about and weightlifting and everything. This guy was, quite an athlete, multiple sports. But yeah, I enjoy it. I appreciate it, but I have no real expertise, to be honest. And but I was blessed to have seen great amateur wrestlers in the pros, like guys like shooters, guys like Billy Robinson and Lou Thez, and Backlund was a tremendous technician. Les Thornton, not as many people remember him. These guys were great wrestlers. And
I was friends with Les Thornton in Calgary.
Great. Yeah.
He lived in Calgary, worked in the medical field the last few years before he died. He died a few years ago.
And Vince Jr. jobbed him out when he came into WWF in the 80s. Yeah. Another guy they squandered. Yeah.
He was an agent, though. I mean, he made some money, but yeah, they didn't use him to his full potential. So where can people get your book if they want to purchase your book that we talked about earlier?
The easiest is Amazon. Just go to Amazon, and we are 4.9 out of 5 ratings, rave reviews. It's from the heart. I wrote a lot of it during COVID. Honor a lot of late friends, Kowalski, Nikolai, Sheik, Johnny Valiant, of course, Nicole Bass, Melissa Coates. I could go on and on and on and on. But it's not all grim. There's some funny story. Thank you, sir. There's a lot of funny stories in there. I could give you a 30-second quickie. I had booked Johnny Valiant for an autograph signing in Philly, and we're about to get on this 20-seater puddle jumper from Philly to New York. What day is it? 9/11/2003. 2 years to the day after the 9/11 tragedy. And the pilot looked like Lee Van Cleef. The pilot looked like every villain in every Chuck Norris terrorist movie. So Johnny Valiant's looking at me, and I'm looking at him. Are we like getting on this plane, Johnny? So we're on the plane, and it's hitting crazy turbulence. And we're like, Johnny, are you going to have to pile drive this guy? Is this guy sending us into the ocean below? Obviously, that's not what happened. But there's a lot of just a lot of things that floated around in my head for many, many years. And during COVID, where we felt like prisoners in New York, I sat down and wrote 100+ stories in this book from the heart. I think you'll enjoy it. And Hannibal, I really appreciate all your support over the years, and can't thank you enough for having me again.
Yeah, it's been interesting. Just one question. Is it the Iron Sheik or the original Sheik that you're talking about in the book? Because I know you're quite an expert on the original Sheik too, I think.
I tell a story about the Iron Sheik in the book. I could give you the 30-second version of that. We do the Hollywood Collectors Show, autograph signing. We're on a shuttle bus heading back to the airport. This woman is looking Nikolai up and down, up and down. It's just a civilian, not a wrestling, person. She's looking at Nikolai and she goes, "Are you Nikolai Volkov?" And Nikolai, who is so warm and friendly and gracious, "Yes, I am, ma'am. Nice to meet you." And they start chatting. And Nikolai all of a sudden goes, "I'd like you to meet my partner, the Sheik." So now the woman's looking the Sheik up and down. And this is 20 years after his prime. He put on a lot of weight. He looked exhausted. He was half asleep. He looked like something the cat dragged in. And she says, the worst thing you could possibly say. She goes, "You're not the Iron Sheik." And he flips out on this packed shuttle bus. He's yelling at the top of his lungs, "You stupid jabroni, get out of the Sheik's face." And she's fleeing in terror on the shuttle bus, So we were on the road with these guys, as agents and friends. And I just have a lot of stories, the good, the bad, and ugly of being involved in pro wrestling. And it's, I think you'll enjoy it. And I hope you'll check it out and support indie everything. Support indie film, indie publishing, indie wrestling, indie music. The billion-dollar corporations don't need your cash,